Hi, I've written a large portion of Project 5 and I'm going to demonstrate the part that I've written. Then I'm going to talk about what you have to do to finish it off. So I'm going to start out looking at how the program should look and behave from the user's perspective. So if I put in my last name here, followed by my first name, followed by my cell phone number, 765-620-2094, and submit. It accepts it cleanly, nothing happens. Okay, now I could have put an alert statement in there saying, nice job, but I just, set it up so that no news is good news. If I were to leave one of these fields empty, okay, so if I clear that out and attempt to submit, it comes back with an error. Okay, so in terms of error testing or verifying the correctness of the user input, I check the last name and first name fields to make sure that there's something in there, and that something could be anything. Okay, so it's very difficult to determine what constitutes a correct last name and first name, and so in my attempt to enforce some kind of rule, do some kind of error testing, what I do is just simply check and see is the text box empty or not, and if it is empty, then I treat it as an error. Otherwise, if it has anything at all in it, then I will go ahead and accept that as being a valid last name or first name. The phone number, on the other hand, I enforce stricter rules. So in my first example, and I'm going to put Kuntz back in here just to make this look a little better. So in my first example, I put it in exactly the way I would like it submitted, and it contains the area code followed by a hyphen, the prefix followed by a hyphen. Okay, so I insert hyphens in the appropriate place. If I were to remove one or both of the hyphens and attempt to submit, the program's designed to check to see whether it contains the correct number of numeric characters, and if it does, then it will put the hyphens where the hyphens belong. Okay, and that works whether I don't put any hyphens in, or even if I do something that's very possible for a human being to do, to put in one hyphen and intend to put the second hyphen in and then somehow miss key. If I do something like that and submit, again, the program's designed to check the correct number of numeric characters and then insert the hyphens where the hyphens belong. So right now I have that much working, and I want to demonstrate how I do that, and then we're going to talk about what needs to be done in terms of verifying that the data is correct, and that's your part of the program. So I want to switch over here to the source code, and I've just got this opened in Notepad. Let's do a quick from top to bottom look at what's contained here and then drill down into the details of the JavaScript functions. I'm writing this in HTML5, and I've got a title section, head section with a title section, and then I begin my script section. Okay, now some things to point out here. I have two comment statements. / begins a comment statement, which is a non-executable statement, but if I were to remove the / then I would have two variable declarations right here. I put these in because you're going to need to do this in the function that you write. So I stuck them in here, which is not the place they belong, but nevertheless, I'm giving you this. You can copy and paste it into your function and then remove the / to transform it into executable code. So let's talk a little bit about what this code would do if it were uncommented, if the // were taken off. What it would do is this first line would create a variable named myDate that would be an instance of the JavaScript date class. So a class is a collection of program code that stores the attributes and actions about a thing. Okay, so try to say that again. It's a collection of program code. It's pre-written program code that stores data and actions about a thing. So as we do object-oriented programming, what we do is we try to identify the things in the environment that we want to manipulate, and then we try to determine what are the attributes of those things that we want to manipulate, and we provide data storage for those attributes, and then we also try to identify what actions do those things need to perform, and those then become the methods that we write. Okay, and the methods are like functions, except they're built into this collection of program code called a class. So that pre-written program code then can be inserted into our program. We can get a working copy of that program code inserted into our program by instantiating the class, creating an instance of the class. And when we create an instance of the class, we then create what's called an object. So an object is a working copy or an instance of a collection of program code. And hereafter, after I instantiate the class, I will use the attributes or the properties of the object, and I will use the methods of the object by referencing the variable myDate. Okay, and I'm going to do that in the next line of code. So in the next line of code, I would create a variable to store a numeric value called this year, and I'm going to get a copy of that by using a property, by invoking a method from the myDate object. Okay, so this is how I invoke a method or call up a method or execute the code that is contained within an object's method. I say object.method name. So built into this date class is a method called getFullYear, and what it does is it queries the system clock and it pulls off the date, and from the date it extracts the 4 digits that make up the year. So if I invoke this method in a program between now and the end of the year, it's going to return a value of 2015. And so that's exactly what happens. If I invoke this method on the myDate object, it's going to return a value equivalent to the current year's 4-digit year format. Alright, now you'll need to do that, and I'm giving you that program code. I'm going to flip over here to a Word document, and if you have familiarized yourself with this document, you'll know that you have to manipulate the components of the date, and I'll just read this to you and point out what needs to be done here. So write a JavaScript function. You have to write a JavaScript function to force the user to enter the date in a MMDDYY format. Okay, so that's the way you anticipate the user entering that in. And if they enter that in, then there should be 2 numeric digits here, there should be an additional 2 numeric digits here, there should be an additional 4 numeric digits here. And much like the way that I manipulated the telephone number, you can drill out those known characters and you can inspect them to see whether or not they're numeric or not. And if they are, then you use them, and if not, you don't. So write a JavaScript function that forces the user to enter in the date in a MMDDYYYY format, where DD is numeric characters in the range of 01 through 31. So you have to check those numbers. Month is numeric characters in the range of 01 through 12. And YYYY is numeric characters representing the current year. Now, note the user will input, you're expecting the user to input the year, but even if they were to input 2014, your program will guarantee that when it's submitted, it'll submit with the current year, because it's going to query the system, get the 4 digits to make up the current year, and it's going to, when it puts together that string of characters that's eventually going to be submitted through that text box, it's going to overwrite whatever the user provided. If the user provided the value of 2015, it overwrites the 2015 with 2015. If the user put in a value of 1965, then it overwrites the value 1965 with 2015. So you're going to have your program guarantee the correct year is input by overwriting the user's portion of that input. And I've also provided a link to the W3C Schools tutorial, and this is a very good website to visit if you're serious about learning JavaScript. So if you want to learn, JavaScript beyond what I cover in this class, this is one of the best places to start learning from. So W3C or W3 Schools is part of the W3C organization, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is a agency that was set up 15, 20 years ago. I don't know how long ago. You can read from Wikipedia and find out the exact date, but early in the process of developing the World Wide Web, it became apparent that different companies like Microsoft and Apple and Oracle, and I don't know who else was involved, and the government needed to cooperate on standards, and so they, in a cooperative way, established an agency called the W3C, as in World Wide Web Consortium, and the World Wide Web set standards for web technology like HTML, like JavaScript, and they also provide some excellent educational resources. So I've provided a link to that, and you should get familiar with it. And so let me flip back over here to the actual source code now, and let's take a look at what I've done and then where you're going to go with this. So we know what the highlighted code is all about. I'm going to ignore it from this point on. You'll notice that I am declaring a variable right here, which is unusual because in the past when I've declared variables within functions. Okay, so if you look at, where did I do that? Okay, so here's an example. I am declaring a variable here, okay, 2 variables being declared right there, and they're within the function verify phone. And that's the way you've seen it done up to this point. Those variables that are declared within functions are known as local variables, and they can be used anywhere within the function in which they're declared, and they will persist as long as that function is active. But as soon as that function expires, as soon as it's terminated, then those variables and the data that they store is disposed of. So they're fairly short-lived variables. Now, on the other hand, if I declare a variable outside of a function the way I have here, it's going to persist for a longer period of time. So it's going to persist for the lifetime of this web page, and it can also be used by any function on the web page. Okay, so it provides a longer lifetime and a broader scope. And I have one variable declared in this fashion called good data, and good data is going to store ultimately one of 2 values, 0 or 1. And if it stores a value of 1, that means that all the data has been tested and is good. And if it stores a value of 0, that means that somewhere along the way a data item has been determined to be entered incorrectly and there's something wrong about the program. So I'm marking the data as being good or bad. Collectively, the data is either going to be good or bad depending upon what value I find here. Okay, so that is what I ultimately look at to determine whether the user has entered in the data correctly. And if I have a function to test the name fields, that function can access good data. If I have a function to test the data in the phone number field, that function can also access good data. So good data can be accessed by any of the functions, and any of the functions, any of the tests of the various fields have the ability to change the value in good data. Alright, so let's take a look at what I've done here. I have a function that clears the form and sets the focus on the text box. Okay, so this is going to get called up from a button that is labeled reset, and its purpose is to clear out the text boxes on the form. Okay, so I have 4 text boxes on the form, and if you look down in the HTML, you'll see that I have text boxes named L name box, F name box, phone box, DOB box. If I go back up to this JavaScript function, you'll see that I'm clearing out F name box, L name box, phone box, DOB box. Okay, so how am I clearing them out? I'm setting their values equal to double quote, an empty string, and that has the effect of nullifying whatever was previously assigned to those text boxes. And then I invoke a method on the L name box, that top left box, the box that the user would typically want to provide data to, as the first text box. I invoke a method, built-in JavaScript method on it called focus, and that has the effect of putting the cursor in that text box, which means that when I reset the form, not only does it clear out the text boxes, but it also sets the cursor in that text box that is most likely to be used first, just as a convenience for the user so that they don't have to reach over with the mouse and click on the text box. Alright, so that's all that's doing, and that's being called up from a button click. The next function, so there's one function. I have another function over here called verify data, and you'll notice that I've put comment statements in most of my functions. I tell who wrote them, when they were written, and then provide a quick overview of what the function does. That way anyone that's reading this source code, either myself or someone else in the future, has the ability to see who wrote it, when it was written, and then kind of wrap their head around what's going to happen here, get some idea going into this, so that they're not just stumbling into the details of the source code blindly. So I provide some detailed instruction here on what goes on, and you'll notice that this is going to be the function that is called up from my other button called submit. So the name of that function is verify data. If I go down to the JavaScript and look at the button that calls it up, there's a button who calls up verify data and sends the contents of 4 text boxes to that method. That gets called from a button click event. The user triggers that. The data from the text boxes are entered into the parameters that you see in the function header, and then good data, that global variable, gets set to 1. This is sort of like innocent until proven guilty. So we're going to assume that the data is good, but we're going to test it along the way, and if it ever tests bad, then we're going to flip its value to 0. And in the end, we'll come back and take a look at good data, and if good data contains a value of 1, that means that it passed every test and retained its value of 1. It is good. If it contains a value of 0, that means somewhere along the way it failed the test for one or more of the data fields, and so then we ask the user to resubmit. So I set good data equal to 1, then I call up a method from this method. Okay, so what you've seen up to this point is that methods are called from button click events, but in this case I call this method from a button click event, then in turn this method calls another method. In fact, it calls a method called verify names, and as soon as it's done it calls another method called verify phone, and when it's done you will insert your program code to call up yet a third method called verify date. So you're going to have to call up your function that you're going to write at this point in the program. Now, when it calls verify names, program control passes from this function to the function verify names. So what's verify names? Well, verify names is going to receive two values. Now you notice, let me back up again, you'll notice that when verify data was called up, the contents of all the text boxes were passed. Text box 1 corresponds with last name, text box 2 corresponds with first name, and so when I call up this method called verify names, I pass the parameter text box 1 as an argument, I pass the parameter text box 2 as an argument. That means a copy of what the user sent is being transferred on over to verify names, and whatever's in the text box that contains the last name then gets placed into this parameter in verify names, and whatever's in the text box that corresponds with first name gets placed into this parameter again within verify names. So I'm getting a copy of that text box handed off to this function, and I've got my documentation at the beginning, and then in a very minimal way I have the function check to see whether or not that copy of the data from text box 1 is an empty string. That means the user didn't provide any input, and if that's true, it sets good data to 0 and it fills in the value ERR into that text box on the form. I do the same kind of thing, checking to see whether the first name is an empty string. If it is, I set good data equals 0, and again put ERR in that text box so the user can immediately see where the error occurred. When that method concludes, program control passes back to the calling function, and it calls another function that I've written called verify phone. Verify phone is going to take the third parameter value and pass it to the specialized method that checks for phone. So this is the contents of the third text box on the form, and as we look at verify phone, it has one parameter. I have the normal documentation at the beginning, and you'll notice I put an alert statement here. I went ahead and commented it out. When I do the initial testing of the program, I always stick an alert statement at the beginning just to be able to trace and see whether all my functions are being called up properly. And then once I see that that happens, I comment them out. I went ahead and left that in. So that's, something that I could remove, should remove at some point. But beyond the basic documentation that I provide in the function, then I declare a couple of variables and set them equal to an empty string, and then I have a loop with a decision structure set up that will look at the characters that are stored in the parameter phone, which is actually a copy of the user's input for the phone number. It's going to take a look at that, and it's going to extract out of that input just the numeric characters, So there is a length property associated with strings, and I had mentioned that in a previous video, and it's going to then iterate for however many characters there are in the data, and one character at a time. Okay, so it's going to start with the first character, which is at character position 0. It's going to take a look at that first character using a JavaScript method called char@. So it's going to take that data, use that data as an object, invoke its char@ method, and that char@, method will go to the character position specified within parentheses here. So in my for loop, if I initialize I to 0, that means the very first time I go through this loop, it's going to be looking at the first character, the character at the 0th position, and it's going to check to see whether or not it is a number. Okay, so there is a JavaScript property called isNan, and isNan will evaluate either true or false depending upon what it's evaluating. I'm sorry, I told you it's a property. This is a built-in method. Okay, it's an action that can be performed. So it's an action that can be performed on any single character, and what it will do is look at that character, and if it's a character in the range of 0 through 9, it will return a value of false. It's checking for not a number, is not a number. So if it finds a value at that character position that's in the range of 0 through 9, it's going to return a false. If it finds anything other than 0 through 9, it returns a value of true. So if I want to check to see if something's a number, I find the character position that I want to evaluate using the char@, method. Then I apply it to this method and I check for false. If what's at that character position is not a number, if that happens to be false, that means it is a number. It's kind of hard to understand maybe. So it takes whatever's at that character position, checks to see if it's not a number. That's going to return true or false. In this case, if it is a number, it's going to return a false. False, it is not a number. It is a number. So false, it is not a number. And so that part would evaluate false, and then I would compare using an equality operator that return value to false, and this would read if false equals false. Well, if false equals false is a true expression, then it would execute this portion of the code. That may be the hardest thing to understand, and you can rewind the video several times and study the details. You can also go to the W3C website, W3 School tutorial, and read up on the isNan method, and you can also read up on the char@, method. And once you understand how these are being used in combination, and once you understand that isNan will always return either a true or false, then you can see how this if statement is working in its entirety. Okay, so if I find that it is a number, then it's going to evaluate false equal false, which will be a true expression, and what it's going to do is take that character and it's going to concatenate it into a variable phone2. When I come out of this, phone2 should have all the numeric characters that are in the original user's input, and there should not be any other characters other than the numeric characters in phone2. Alright, now the next thing it does is checks phone2 to see whether its length property is equal to 10. If I look at the input here, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 numeric characters in the input if it's entered in correctly. Okay, so the correct number of numeric characters that should be entered is 10. If that string that contains just the numeric characters has a length of 10, if it's just numeric characters and it has a length of 10, that means that there are 10 characters in that string, and therefore I can begin to concatenate to this third variable what's in phone2 with hyphens inserted at the appropriate location. So I'm going to then concatenate the first 3 characters from phone2 into phone3 and then add a hyphen. Then I'm going to concatenate the next 3 characters from phone2 into phone3 and add another hyphen. And then I'm going to concatenate the rest of the characters to the end of phone3, and that completes the entire string of characters that make up the phone numbers with the hyphens inserted in the proper location. That all gets done if the length is equal to 10. If the length is not equal to 10, then I have an error, and I would take the else path and write error out to that text box and then flip good data to 0. Okay, so that is the end of my function that deals with verifying the phone number. And after that is where you should insert the method that you write that verifies the date. And you're going to be using the same methods and the same properties that I'm using in a slightly different way. And you're going to be using some, flow of control structures, probably some looping and decision and that kind of thing in a manner similar to what I did, but you're going to have to design the algorithm to deal with verifying the date, which will be slightly different than what I did for verifying the phone number. But nevertheless, you're going to have to come up with the program code, write it there, and finish this project. So let's go back to the specifications, try to wrap things up. You will be dealing with the date, and when it is all said and done, you will be either inserting the correct date. The correct date will appear in the text box, remain in the text box after it's submitted, or if you find anything wrong with the date, then ERR will appear, and then the user is going to have to correct it, much the way I demonstrated with the rest of the program code that I had written. I want you to, when you write your function, document it. Okay, you can follow the same documentation standards that I did here. Tell me who you are, provide me with an overview. You don't have to provide a line of documentation for every single line of source code, but on the other hand, where you're going to do something, beyond that overview, where you're going to do something really significant, some major step in the process, like where I yank out all the numeric characters and store them in a separate variable, then you might want to precede that part of the code with its own comment statement. All right, I think I have made this as clear as I possibly can. Good luck. There's a lot of work that you're going to have to do, so I would get started on it early.